In the early medieval period, it was traditional for English kings to be portrayed in profile. Much of this has to do with the fact that for centuries, depictions of rulers existed solely in the form of coinage. Religious artwork had an arguably greater effect on those depictions, as many diptychs and triptychs showed saints in side profile. Those who could afford to have their own portraits painted often followed this fashion. By the 14th century, advances in painting techniques led portraits in side profile to fall out of favor. Why, then, does the most famous painting of Henry V, the only one known to be painted during his reign, show him in profile? Was this intended as a symbol of his piety? Was it perhaps intended to strengthen his legitimacy in the wake of his father's waning support by beckoning back to the kings of old? While these theories strike a chord, the true reason is far less presumptuous. Before he was known as the glorious conqueror of France, he was shot in the face by a fucking arrow. Let's go over a bit of backstory before we really dig into things. Henry's father was the Duke of Lancaster, one of the most powerful men in England, popularly known as Henry Bolingbroke. He was also a man with a claim to the throne. In 1399, Bolingbroke made good on that claim by rousing support from fellow noblemen and usurping the reigning king, Richard II. For obvious reasons, the seizure of the crown didn't sit well with all of the subjects of the man now called Henry IV. More than a decade of rebellion followed the capture, imprisonment, and death of Richard II, though a more accurate term would be murder by forced starvation. One of these rebellions was led by a man with a grudge, Henry Percy, the son and heir of the Earl of Northumberland. He was a renowned warrior, known as Harry Hotspur in reference to his speed in battle. After supporting Bolingbroke in his takeover of the throne, Hotspur felt his great family was not receiving the respect they were due, let alone compensation for the vast sums they had spent defending the Scottish border for Henry. In the summer of 1403, fed up with his dismissive treatment, Hotspur kicked things off and the First Percy Rebellion began. Here, ladies and gentlemen, is where we catch up with our young prince. The Battle of Shrewsbury began on the 21st of July, 1403. At the side of King Henry IV was his 16-year-old son, popularly known as Prince Hal. Both fought valiantly throughout the day and, spoilers, eventually secured victory with the death of Hotspur himself. However, while leading the left flank of his father's army, young Prince Hal was struck by an arrow courtesy of the notorious Cheshire longbowmen. Shot in the face, to be exact. He continued to fight on until the day had been won, but his battle for survival had just begun. The projectile had pierced through the left side of his face, beside his nose at a downward angle. This was a devastating blow in more ways than one. It was a miracle that Henry wasn't killed instantly, and better yet, there were no signs of brain damage. Accounts differ as to who pulled the wooden shaft from his face. Some sources claim it was the teenager himself, whilst others attest that one of his retainers insisted on doing the deed for the prince. However, the arrowhead itself was still firmly lodged more than 6 inches deep inside his skull. The conventional practice of removing an arrowhead by passing it out through the other side of the wound was impossible. Prince Hal needed that about as much as he needed, well, another hole in the head. After the thoughts and prayers of conventional medical men were exhausted, a surgeon was called from London as a last resort. His name was John Bradmore, and he knew he didn't have much time. 3 centuries earlier, Richard the Lionheart had been shot in the left shoulder with a crossbow bolt. The wound became gangrenous, and the king died of infection after a grueling 10 days. The arrowhead needed to be removed if there was any chance of Prince Hal surviving. Bradmore began by making tents, or small pointed probes made of the dried pith of an elder tree, which he covered in clean linen and soaked in rose-infused honey. Bradmore first inserted the smallest of these probes into the prince's wound to prevent it from closing, and left it in place for some time. He then began the process of enlarging the wound, by placing increasingly larger and longer tents into the wound, until the tip of the probe reached what he estimated to be the base of the arrowhead. Next, Bradmore commissioned a blacksmith to prepare a set of thin, hollow metal tongs with a screw running through the middle. He inserted the tongs into the wound, opened them slightly, then ran the screw through the tongs and into the hollow base of the arrowhead. Once the screw latched onto the arrowhead, he slowly began to dislodge it. By moving it to and fro, little by little, and with the help of God, I extracted the arrowhead. The offending object had been removed, but Prince Hal was still in mortal danger. Bradmore first cleansed the open wound with white wine. Next, he prepared another set of probes, which were soaked in a mendicative ointment made from honey infused with barley flour and turpentine resin. On the day after the surgery, he placed the largest probe into the wound. This probe was removed 2 days later, the wound rinsed with more wine, and a slightly smaller probe was put in its place. This process was repeated again and again over the course of 20 days until the wound had closed completely. The white wine acted as a natural antiseptic, while the infused honey served as an antibacterial ointment, preventing a life-threatening infection. Once the wound was closed, he treated the wound with unguentum fuchsium, a balm made of resins and gums which also had antiseptic properties. While he worked to close the wound and prevent infection, Bradmore had an even bigger concern, the risk of spasms or seizures, which he wrote were my greatest fear, and that all spasms following wounds are mortal. He thus prepared another ointment, consisting of more than 20 various herbs, waxes, butters, and resins, which he noted as being good for chilled nerves and sinews, and for all cold causes. This mixture, which is referred to as a hot plaster, was applied to the prince's neck every morning and evening. It was believed that exposure to cold would cause seizures. Warming balms and plasters were used to prevent chill and relax the muscles. Regardless of the validity of his theory, the treatment was successful, and the prince recovered without issue. Bradmore was widely acclaimed for saving the life of the heir to the throne. He was rewarded for his service with a yearly grant of 10 marks from the prince's household, until his death in 1412. This is equivalent to about £440, or $600 today. The surgeon recorded his innovative treatment of young Hal in his posthumously published Philomena, one of the earliest surgical treatises. Interestingly, it also included an account of an earlier case in which Bradmore treated the king's master pavillionaire, or tent maker, fancy that, who attempted suicide by stabbing himself in the gut twice with a great, wide Baslard dagger. Much to the patient's displeasure, he survived after 86 days of treatment. As for our Prince Hal, although his wound had healed, the incident left him with more than just superficial scars. Many scholars have argued that the physical and mental trauma he suffered caused a sudden personality change. He became notorious for his reckless behavior, drinking, womanizing, and general disregard for his duties as Prince of Wales. It may be that this near-death experience left him wanting to live life to the fullest, so to speak. Upon the death of his father and accession to the throne as Henry V, another transformation took place. He became an incredibly pious man who firmly believed that God was on his side, perhaps rightfully so. He was renowned for his compassionate, gracious nature and brotherly treatment of his soldiers. Following his spectacular victory at Agincourt in 1415, Henry offered to fight the son of King Charles VI in a one-on-one duel, stating that he wished to refrain from any further effusion of blood. When a peace treaty between England and France was finally signed in 1420, the terms allowed Charles to live out his remaining years as king, with Henry as his heir. He married the king's daughter, Catherine of Valois, with whom he had a son in 1421. Henry V died suddenly on the 31st of August, 1422, possibly of dysentery or heat stroke. He was 35 years old. While the merits of psychological analysis of this case are surely debatable, some facts are indisputable. Henry V suffered a horrific wound and went on to become one of the most beloved kings in the history of England, a legendary hero in his time and in ours. There's no telling how different the history of medieval Europe might have played out if John Bradmore's efforts had been unsuccessful. One thing is for certain, Henry will never be forgotten by the few, the happy few, the band of brothers, who fought with him upon St. Crispin's Day.